On today's show, we sit down with Dustin Pease of LocateNation.com, and we're talking pitch command.
Welcome to another episode of the Baseball Awakening Podcast, where we dive into the raw, unfiltered, unsexy side of player development. Get ready for some knowledge bombs with your host, Geoff Rottmeyer.
Welcome to the Baseball Awakening Podcast. I'm Geoff Rottmeyer, and I'm sitting down with Dustin Pease of LocateNation.com. That's location with a K. LocateNation.com. Dustin Pease. How are you, sir?
Good to hear from you. Thanks, Geoff, for having me on today.
Awesome. Well, listen, I'm glad to have you on, Dustin. So you are the founder of LocationNation.com, location with a K, LocationNation.com, where you tend to bring some focus to the command aspects to pitching. And I want to pick your mind on some things, but let's just kind of start with telling us a little bit about your background and then how and why you started LocationNation.com.
Essentially, I just kind of grew up in an environment where I was introduced to location and command at a young age. And, I really took that to heart because I wasn't a physically gifted pitcher. I was pretty small. And, when you turn on a major league game, even 20 years ago, I turned on a game, you see a bunch of really big dudes on TV. And, it's a little discouraging when you're not going to potentially be physically gifted. And I was definitely small and weak, and that, the prospectus for that to happen wasn't looking good. So it was really cool to have the pitching coach that I had kind of talk to me about location. He was associated with a major league organization. He was associated with the major league team, the Baltimore Orioles. So it was really cool to hear how dominant and how effective location could be. Learning about the effects of location was really important. And then from that point forward, trying to create that level of command where I felt like I was very proficient in it was a long process, but it was something I really took to heart, and it was something I really dedicated a lot of time in my life towards achieving, and it paid off. So, it was really cool to kind of follow that process. I think in terms of social media and in terms of like how my message is resonating, I feel like it's interesting because lots of people are going to advocate for pitching command, and lots of people are going to say command is important. I think it's, a little bit different with me because I was able to produce a career with my message. So you need to throw really hard in order to make it to higher levels. But I was able to produce a successful career at every level I've played at. I didn't get to make it to Major League Baseball, but at every level I played at, I was able to produce successful outcomes. So in a way, just to provide that inspiration to people that maybe are looking for alternative ways to continue to improve their performance. I feel like it's kind of cool to present that. And it's really kind of cool to look back on my career and then present that to people. So it's kind of where I am.
Yeah. And so in a world where we are so focused on velocity, we're so focused on it to the point where you go from one extreme to where it's velocity focus or the other extreme, which is command focus. You talk a lot about the commanding part, but you don't discredit the velocity part. Something to think that you do, but that's not the case. So you bring some balance to the pitching world. There's more than enough velocity talk, and you bring the command talk. So what are your thoughts for the people that are listening that have a misconception of what you believe? What are your thoughts on the velocity part complementing the command part?
Yeah, it's good. I feel like that is a big misconception, and I can see how it can be.
Sure.
The brand of what I've created says Lokation Nation. I designed it from a few different angles. The K is backwards, and I feel like guys with command are going to get more called strikes and things like that. But velocity is important. I always understood that velocity was going to be an integral part of my development and an integral part of me advancing. I knew that I was going to need to reach certain levels of velocity in order to be somewhat relevant in the game of baseball. So, velocity is important. I mean, in terms of advancement in the game, you're going to need to continue to throw harder and harder and harder. I mean, velocities are continuing to go up. And I think, that's why I put in my bio, I immediately started off with velocity complements your ability to command. I guess I just like to try to redirect people to what is absolutely necessary in the present moment in order to compete in a baseball game. Any pitcher that goes to take the pitcher's mound in a game that particular day is going to have what they have. They're either going to have 98 or they're going to have 82 or they're going to have 71. 71 is not going to throw 92. 95 isn't going to throw 112. You're going to have what you have in the present moment. And, that's why, and that's why I speak to command so much. You want to be able to command and execute what you currently have. And if you can't, if you aren't, then we need to find ways to build your skill level so that you can execute maybe either at that speed or a little bit slower than that speed, or start a process to where you're dialing it back some to kind of work back up to your peak speed. But as Miles Michael has put in one of my old previous blogs, where he did a blog for me, he said he thinks every pitcher is going to have a sweet spot where they're not quite at max effort, but they're at their most comfortable level of feel for command and executing the glove. So, I kind of feel that way as well. I think it is difficult to operate at a max level and have that really high level of execution, just speaking from experience and then with others. But velocity is important. I mean, it's just part of the game. It's just something we got to continue to work towards. But I just feel like in the present moment, you're going to need location. You're going to need command.
I love it. Not only did you make a career out of it, but you are now training guys to kind of take that approach. So can you talk about that a little bit? What's the process of developing command? There's mechanics, there's repetition. What's your process of helping a guy develop command?
So I try not to be too biased towards it, but I have my own process. It required insane amounts of repetition, insane amounts of I would say, constrained repetition, not just going through your emotion. I mean, I think that's an important point because, there's a lot of people ask me what mechanics are best for command. And when it comes down to like command, it's more so the task and executing the goal than how you're moving to get there. So while the repetition is important, we want to feel like we're moving in very similar ways. We want to be able to have that feedback from, did we execute the goal? Did it hit the glove? Did it miss the glove? Did we execute the rule? Did it miss in the area we wanted it to miss? How many times did we do that? Are we counting? Are we keeping track? All these things can help us see if we're performing well. You can visibly see it. Command is something very hard to measure, but for the individual that's going through that action, the individual that's going through the intention of either hitting the glove or throwing it to a certain area or an intended area, we're going to be our best judges. Did we execute what we were trying to do? And so I mean, with what I do to train guys, I do a lot of constraint-based training where we're kind of like really honing in and focusing on different areas of the strike zone. We try to do a lot of our training at 60 feet. We do some at flat ground, but just large amounts of repetition, not a lot of mechanical work when it comes down to actually true command training, unless there is just something glaringly off with their motion where it's just constantly inconsistent. But even so, if you told me to go through 10 different pitching mechanics, I'd probably still be pretty confident I could throw the ball where it's supposed to go. So again, I just think it's an interesting thing to train, but it's more of an attentional redirection, I'd say.
So when you are training guys, do you say, when you say a target, do you have like a 9-hole net? Do you have a catcher? Kind of talk about that a little bit, and are you picking a particular spot in the 9-hole, or kind of talk about that? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, you're gonna pull up the internet, find not thousands,
yeah,
maybe like a ton of different target devices. And for me, and this is where I feel like I speak about the culture of the game a lot, but this is where I feel like it's really difficult for guys to actually train to become better pitchers. If you want to have the greatest transfer to performance, as in like the game, you want to operate in practice in a similar fashion. But the problem for pitchers in 2018 and really all the time is having a catcher. And catchers don't want to catch. Dads would prefer not to catch, and other pitchers don't want to catch. So how do we pitch to a catcher consistently? It's very difficult. But in order to really get a good feel to create that same type of environment, yeah, it'd be best to throw to a catcher. And within our training, with the way that I have it designed at Lakation Nation or my facility here in Frederick, we're always throwing the catchers. So we're throwing to the glove. We're having the catcher move around. We're getting that real good feel for how we're executing the target, how it can be moved. And again, the catcher aspect of it is important too. All this kind of plays into our ability to execute. So I just feel like the best way to see that transfer is to create the most relative environment in practice so that we can use it in the game.
Right. So whenever you guys are working on this, are you guys, it's a slow focus getting the movement pattern down and then the command?
Right.
Is there a process like that, or is it kind of a all-in-one, we're trying to get the mechanics and the location down at once?
Yeah, that's awesome. So I kind of see it like this, and this is kind of, again, I'll relate it to how I kind of work through it with guys too. When I get a guy, they first start seeing me, we'll check out how they're moving. We'll do some video. We'll look through the mechanics. We'll look and evaluate some of their efficiencies, and we'll try to correct some of those things, because it's very difficult to focus on the command aspect if you're not moving the way that maybe could be most beneficial. That being said, I had a very unorthodox pitching motion with probably a ton more of inefficiencies than I could have had. But the way that I moved, I was able to move in a very optimized type way. So I was able to move very aggressively and produce, I would say a higher output than even others who moved efficiently just because I moved that way so much and I was able to optimize the way that I moved. So, we'll look at some things. We don't change everything with how people move. Some stuff is suggestive. Some stuff we'll kind of see if they can kind of problem solve themselves. Like if we kind of say, hey, we're not really driving like this, or we're not really keeping our upper half closed as much, or we're not landing this way, we can kind of let them bring it to their attention and see how different things feel. And obviously we want to shape them in the most optimal positions, but it might not be the same for everyone. We might have people that don't really move the way we want or move well, and they still have really good output, So that being said, yeah, you want to have them have a pattern. So once that pattern is addressed, and once that pattern is adopted, or once we feel like we're in a position where we feel like that pattern is somewhat repeatable, they have a really good idea how they're moving, then we have to change the intention for why they're moving. Most people, when they pick up a ball, I would say the majority of people, when they pick up the ball and they go to throw it, their intention is to throw the ball. And I know that sounds really simple, but when you're really working on accuracy and command, we shouldn't be thinking about throwing the ball. Throwing the ball action just happens. The idea is, are we hitting the target? And the whole reason why we're moving through our pitching motion is to execute hitting the glove. So we want to be in such a comfortable state with our movement pattern, such a comfortable state with how we're moving, that we just move through it autonomously. We don't have to think about engaging effort or adding or engaging different parts of our motion. Like, we don't want to be thinking about X, Y, Z through our mechanics. We just want to let it happen the way it does, so that we can focus all of our attention on the task at hand, which is hitting the glove, or paying attention to the rules and the constraints that we have in that particular training method.
Yeah. So when you get, what do you do when you got a guy that comes to you and he's getting all this stuff down? He's gotten to the point where he's not even thinking about his mechanics. All he's thinking about is trying to hit the glove. And then he goes to a team ball coach, and the coach says, well, that isn't going to work. So now he's thinking about his mechanics all over again. And it seems like they never get anywhere because he's constantly thinking about that when he's away from you. So what's the conversation like with the kid to manage that?
Yeah, so the conversation it's okay. So I just want to make sure I understand the question. So, he's with, let's say he's with me, he's thinking about hitting the glove. Maybe, is he hitting the glove in that sense? Would you say he is more accurate when he's with me and then not as accurate with his team or his whatever his coach is saying to him? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I think, right now you got him to a point where he's so comfortable and he's not thinking mechanics,
Right.
which is where you're trying to
Right.
get. And then he goes to a team practice and the coach says, your arm's too low or your arm's too high. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. So now he's thinking about his mechanics all over again.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's going to be a negative thing. I mean, that's something I'm kind of also finding as I go. I mean, I continue to do research and try to further my education on how I'm developing skill, based on my own process and then just based on the research I do. But like if I let a kid go through 10 pitches and he misses 5 of them, and I interject on every single one that he misses and says and give him a mechanical reason for why he missed the glove, that's usually not a good thing, and that happens a lot. Like, oh, he's missing up all the time. Hey, you're releasing too high, or hey, get your arm up. Probably not the problem. It's probably something that the player alone can make these adjustments on his own. They can problem solve on their own. Without the interjection. The problem is it's the way that they're practicing. It's the way that they're designing their practice that can be better. Sometimes there's some interjection that can help, but yeah, you're right. I mean, when you start directing attention towards the physicality of what you're doing, it's going to make it harder for you to focus on the attention or focus your attention on the task at hand. And it's going to be more difficult to execute. It's very difficult to manage that attention, especially in a high pressure setting like a baseball game.
Right. So what's the conversation like when you have a guy that's going to that team coach and they're saying all of that? How do you help them work through that? Because they come in and now they're a mess because their coach made them do X, Y, Z.
Right. Again, a lot of times you always want to be respectful.
Sure.
My advice to myself from my pitching coach growing up was always just say yes sir, no sir, be respectful, and try to continue doing what you're doing. Especially if it's in the midst of a baseball game. If it's in the midst of a baseball game and people are yelling XYZ, it's typically that's not when you fix things. You fix things in practice so you can perform in the game. So, or you wait for the inning to be over and then you speak in between innings. But even if that's happening, it's very difficult to make those adjustments in the game, especially if you're going to be giving them poor information, like trying to tell them to mechanically change something in order to complete a task. So yeah, what do you tell that kid? I mean, it's tough to tell them exact. You know what? I don't know. It's hard to give you an exact answer on that. You just hope that there's more collaboration between coaches, and a lot of times, for what it's worth, a lot of team coaches or high school coaches or travel ball coaches or college coaches, they don't always like to collaborate with private instructors or off-site coaching. They don't like that. And I do the best I can to try to collaborate with a lot of my pitchers' coaches, just so that they are on the same page, so that they can operate freely and comfortably in their environment. And again, it always comes back to the environment. So the coach could be another variable that adds to the task issue. And that's something that we want to avoid.
Something that we've been seeing, kind of popping up in the last couple of years is this idea of throwing a heavier baseball or throwing a bigger baseball or throwing a smaller ball. What's your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, so I wrote a blog on that at least a month or two ago, maybe longer. I'm not sure when I wrote it. But I'm in terms of like changing if you're talking about this purely in the sense of pitching command, I'm not a fan. I mean, I'm just not a fan of changing the ball that you're trying to like coordinate your brain's movement around. The way that your brain is trying to interpret everything about the task, and everything about the task is going to operate in the environment of a baseball game. And in a baseball game, you're going to use a 5.25 ounce baseball. If we are manipulating that in our practice for us to get a better understanding of how to use a 5.25 ounce baseball, it just doesn't make sense to me. The brain is very delicate in how we coordinate movements. And, when I think about trying to figure out how to move that ball around, how to move the baseball around the way that we want, I think about, using different types of constraints for differential learning that doesn't involve changing the weight of the ball, but talks about changing the direction, trajectories, positioning of the target. And these are all things that definitely work in training to help guys find what they're doing. Again, to kind of help aid that problem-solving process. And I think that's why, again, if we're talking about this in the sense of command, I think that's why, people are just trying to think of ways. They're just trying to think of ways to help people find feel. And, while I feel like it's an interesting idea, I don't see it as a good idea. So that's just my take on it. Again, and some people might be like, oh, I can command now that I use different baseballs. Like, again, when I think about true pitching command, you executing your pitches at a high percentage rate. If you're not using the computational weight, it's going to be very difficult for you to develop the skill using other types of weight, in my opinion.
Right, I agree. So let me ask you this. So when you're doing this command training, do you pick a location or is it situational? Kind of talk about that a little bit and how you develop that part.
Yeah. So I think it's a process. So my process, my personal process involved thousands of pitches throwing to precise locations until I was satisfied that I can do it in any environment. And I know I was only doing it in practice. Unfortunately, I had a catcher who would have caught me for the entire, for the rest of his life, which was my father. Having that type of timeless environment was critical, I feel like, to my ability to where I was able to get my ability to. I didn't operate at high percentages of effort, so I was doing many, many reps daily to execute this. But the way that I structure it, I definitely try to bring that to light, to try to have my guy, because I'm not going to work with my pitchers every single day. It's impossible for me to do that. I might see them once a week. I might see them every other week. I'm going to give them the leeway and the suggestions to do that more on their own if they are capable, if they can find a catcher. But, I try to just give them a better idea of process. So, like, we want to be able to execute low in the zone. We want to be able to execute a strike 7 out of 10 times at minimum. We want to be able to execute our intention 7 out of 10 times. We want to get through that maybe in flat ground. Then we want to be able to get through that on a pitcher's mound. Then we want to be able to get through that maybe in sequencing pitches, like maybe fastballs in and then changeups away, fastballs in and changeups away. Then maybe we want to do that with a hitter in the box. And then maybe we want to do that with an L screen and a batter swinging, where it still feels like practice, but it's not quite competition. And then we remove the L screen and we are actually pitching to them. Like, we want to transfer all of this work where we're trying to build that comfortability in how we're moving and how we're executing to that game speed, that game effort. And it takes time. I implemented a system when I was coaching at Mount St. Mary's University as a Division I pitching coach. I implemented it for 2+ years, and it was good. It was good to see, I called it a level system. It's probably going to be the next thing I publish here soon. We were working, I think I had like 12 or 13 levels. I could easily add more, but our best pitchers were the ones that were able to execute all the way to the top. And then by the end of our session, or I think it was our fall through the winter, we still had guys on level 1, which was just trying to execute a bottom zone strike on the opposite arm side. And they couldn't do it 7 out of 10 times. And those were the guys that couldn't do it. They really struggled in games to do it, and we had pressure testing every week. So the levels would operate by pressure testing, and some guys could handle the pressure and some guys couldn't. And again, all of this reflects what happens in the game. So it's kind of like you get a chance to see what happens in practice, what happens in the game. The guys that can handle the pressure in the practice are the guys that can handle the pressure in the game. Again, there's no exact science to it, but it was good and interesting to see the ones who performed well and the ones who didn't perform well. And again, some of it was just mindset. Like, they just wouldn't buy into it. Was sometimes it's like the culture, like telling them they need to throw harder. They really struggled to understand that executing was what we were going for. We weren't trying to throw it 1,000 miles an hour. We were trying to execute that, and they just really struggled. And it was unfortunate to see, but it's a constant conversation trying to help guys understand the importance of command and location.
Yeah. What's the pressure testing in practice setting? What does that look like?
So yeah, the pressure testing. So we did that every Friday, and the task usually week to week was whatever I had the rules or the constraints set as. So, like, let's just take level 1 for example. We were doing flat grounds. Again, not 60 feet. This was like the most initial test. Flat ground. we were going bottom corner strikes at the knees, and they had to either throw it at the glove, which was low, or it could be down, as in they could bounce the ball and they would pass. So the constraint was they actually had a good area of miss, where they had to hit the glove. And the reason I made the constraint like this was because our pitchers missed up a lot. And we're not throwing 96. Not all these guys have insane spin rates. Like, they need to work down in the strike zone. And we need to work up in the strike zone to certain hitters. You can find that stuff out in the game. But they're constantly missing up, thigh high, miss. So we're trying to redirect their attention to down the bottom of the strike zone to be able to miss. And so the pressure testing worked kind of like that. So they had the whole week to work on it. They could work on that. I would give the freedom for them to do play catch, long toss, work back in, do the test that they were going to be tested on every week. They could do it as many times as they wanted. I'm very pro throw. Got allowed a lot of throwing. And some guys would kill it. They'd kill it all week long. They're getting 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10. And then the Friday would roll around and they'd fail. And the pressure basically was 7 out of 10. They had to get 7 out of 10. And I was essentially the judge. As I said before, we can see if we executed the idea based on the constraint or not. So, that's kind of how the pressure testing worked. If they passed, they got to move on to the next level. If they didn't, they had a whole another week of practicing it again. So it's cool. And creating that tension and pressure are ways that we want to help guys feel it, when they need it. And knowing that you have a whole other week of practice if you don't pass is going to put some significant pressure on you, because it becomes more competitive among the staff at that point,
Right. So with the long toss, do you build a location protocol with that, or are they just simply long tossing?
Yeah, I would just let them long toss. But when I like long toss a lot, long toss is something I implemented for my entire life, my entire career, to try to build my arm speed and build my hand speed, and build more energy and effort. I like long toss a lot because, and this kind of will oppose flat grounds too, but long toss allows you to hone and target. You're playing catch with someone, they have a glove, and it's going to resemble the idea of task that we're going to be going for at 60 feet 6. So, as they're backing up to 300 feet, we can still hone and target and stay attuned to the goal, which is hitting the glove and executing the location. So, that's why I like long toss, because it kind of allows for a balance of increasing your arm speed, increasing your arm strength. I don't like to use arm strength, arm speed rather, explosiveness, all the way back in. And we're constantly being aware of that, so that, like I said before, the distances, the trajectories, those things can kind of help you find and feel how you're releasing, then I'd say better than changing the modality of the ball. So, and then, flat grounds, it is what it is. I did a lot of flat ground work, but again, that's still not 60 feet 6 inches. But at the flat grounds, we do have a catcher getting down. So we kind of have the pitcher getting down, he's catching. So it kind of resembles more of the environment than, say, long toss does, So you got that, and then we'll move back to 60 feet. But no, I like long toss purely because you can still hone in on the idea and intention of targeting the glove and seeing if you actually hit the glove,
So you're big on the repetition part, which I am too. What's the intensity like? Some guys like the max effort throws, which is what it is, or do you like the 75 to 80%? What does that whole look like when you're working on command?
Yeah, so that's in my book that I wrote. I kind of put together a little guide. Again, it is purely a guide. It is nothing definitive. It's more processed through how I did it and how I've worked on it with guys. But percentages of effort are really big when you're trying to find and feel what you're doing to execute a task. So I like to make it a lot of analogies when I relate it to skill work. Like, let's say if it's like jump rope or ladder drills or riding a bike or learning how to sprint, you're going to have to do things slow so that you can coordinate your patterns to execute the task. Maybe it's playing the guitar. You're not just going to hand someone a guitar and they're going to start to shred around on the guitar. They're going to have to learn the positioning and hands and coordinate their movements to execute the goal. So, percentages of effort are really important. So if a person never coordinates their movements, like never truly coordinates the reason for movement or the whole entire schema in their brain for their moving to execute the glove or to task their bodily mechanics to execute targeting, and the only thing that they ever did was work on percentage of effort to just increase explosiveness and ball speed, which would be just velocity, then it's going to be extremely, extremely difficult to redirect attention at that max effort while they're already at max effort. So if they never task command to 100% effort and they're able to throw at 95 or whatever, it's going to be very difficult to help them command at 95 because it's almost going to be like starting over. They're going to have to back down the percentage of effort a little bit so that they can learn. And like analogy to guitar, they have to learn what the notes are. They're going to have to learn how to move their fingers around to execute the task of maybe playing a correct note or jumping over a jump rope. And then we can speed it back up so they get the coordination. So again, it comes down to task, and it really comes down to effort. It's a good question because it's not always velocity; it's how much effort you're using. Like a 70-mile-an-hour pitcher might be at max effort, and he still can't command. So it comes down to, how did you learn to get to 70 miles an hour? How did you learn to get to 90 miles an hour? Did you coordinate your patterns to execute at that speed? And if not, we might need to rework and remap your brain to do that.
Yeah, and so whenever you are working on, obviously you want to start with the fastball, right? You got to be able to command the fastball.
Right.
So what's the conversation like with a guy when, okay, so now we're getting ready to work on his curveball. And a lot of kids don't realize what that pitch is supposed to do or what it's supposed to feel like, where it's supposed to look to start commanding that. So how do you start that process of teaching them, let's just say the curveball, and it's supposed to move like this, and you look here and it goes there, at first it doesn't break. So kind of talk about that conversation of developing a secondary pitch.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, for me, like, looking back, I was able to, when I learned how to throw my slider, we called it a slider. It was later identified as a slurve. It's almost like creating like that movement pattern. Like, you're like, okay, that's a pitch. That's the, it's designed a certain way. I like how it looks. And then you just kind of understand that, okay, I know what I'm doing to throw that. I'm making it move. Okay, so you have your pitch at that point. You're going to continue to get stronger and build, and your fastball speed is going to pick up. You're going to continue to throw the pitch better. But when I think about, off-speed pitches, when I think about the process of how I acquired fastball command, it's just continued constant problem solving. So if you're at 60 feet 6 inches and you already understand how to throw a curveball, your curveball moves, your changeup has fade, your slider has that small late bite. If we've already established the fact that you're able and capable of throwing that quality of pitch, then it comes down to problem solving. So again, if we add those constraints back in to the targeting, where the ball needs to end up, without me even interjecting, if I just basically explain to them the goal of where the ball needs to end up and where it needs to be, yeah, it's going to take some time, but the best problem solver is going to be the individual. It's not going to be me interjecting saying, you need to let go here, you need to let go there. The goal is to throw it to a certain spot. They're going to be their best judge. And I think the biggest problem is the amount of time that is underestimated, how much time that is going to take in order to solve those problems at a high rate. I threw thousands of pitches. People aren't going to go out and throw thousands of pitches, but I also threw them at lower percentages of effort. But again, you can build as you go. And again, in my book, because I put it as a guide with the percentage of effort, maybe you are at 60% for a while. Maybe you feel like you can increase to 70, 80% and still execute the way that you're working toward, because you're seeing those tasks completed. You're seeing those tasks successfully completed. So yeah, we can naturally start to add more effort in. We might even feel like we're adding more effort without trying to, because we're doing so many repetitions. So again, I just think it's a big problem solving thing. There's a problem. We need to hit the glove. We need to see if we're failing or succeeding, and making those adjustments every single time, and making sure we're directing our attention accordingly.
Right. I agree. So what about vision? What do you tell them to look at?
For breaking balls?
Yeah, let's just go through the fastball first and then the breaking ball.
Yeah, I mean, with fastball, again, it'll depend, again, back to problem solving. It depends on our type of movement. Like if we have a pitch that's constantly running or fading or diving, however many inches it is, or whatever measure to be, because we don't need an exact measurement. We can see these things. They can unfold right in front of us, and that's going to be our best idea. If somebody told me that my fastball moves 6 inches, and I need to account for that. That's good that I have the 6-inch idea, or I know how much it's moving, but it's not understanding that exact measurement. It's not going to help me understand exactly where to start the ball. It's gonna take, the ball needs to end up in the glove, and I'm going to need to keep finding where I need to start it. So visually, if I throw a straight fastball and I know I throw a straight fastball and I can visually see them throwing a straight fastball, then I'm going to obviously want to look at the glove. If I can tell my pitch is moving, then we're going to refer to my chapter in my guide that I refer to as focal points. So like if you feel like your fastball is running a good amount, sometimes I would start my fastball at the guy's belt buckle and let it run back into the inner half. Sometimes I would not, depending if I felt like my movement wasn't as much, I would like aim somewhere in between the catcher and the belt buckle and let it run back to the corner, or the kneecap, depending what the vertical constraint was for that particular pitch. So yeah, you're looking at different focal points, and sometimes that can help, and sometimes it's a little bit scary for people because they don't want to hit people, but at the same time, it kind of helps us understand movement better. So no movement, I'm going to say you're looking at the glove. With movement, problem solve. Figure out where you can start it to get the ball to end where you want it to be. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of feel to solve it.
Yeah, I see a lot of guys that just don't understand how their ball moves. So they never really gain that trust and confidence in their pitch. And it's one of those things where you got to kind of watch and understand what your ball's doing so that you can adjust accordingly.
I think it's tough because sometimes, even I remember this at a young age, and even still, sometimes it's very difficult to see your own movement because you're moving. We're moving in three-dimensional space. We're moving in three-dimensional space. We're ballistically launching a ball in three-dimensional space, and the ball is moving in three-dimensional space or however many other dimensions on its way there. So there's a lot of things that our brain is trying to compute in a very split-second type of time frame, and it's difficult, and upon release, I feel like that's why it's hard sometimes to see our release, and that's why I do suggest trying to keep your head as still as you can upon release, so that we can kind of calibrate more where the ball is moving. If we can kind of make that adjustment, if our head is getting bopped around and our ball has a ton of movement, it's harder for us to calibrate, in my opinion. How do we make those adjustments? So, because again, that visual perception is going to be big in how we make those adjustments.
Right. So what are your thoughts on visualization? Do you have guys visualize before they pitch?
Yeah. They could do it before every pitch. They could do it. Visualization is another chapter in my guide. Visualization can happen anywhere. I think when sometimes guys are maybe they're in their command training or they're in practice, whatever, or if they are in a game, because I'll try to always redirect their attention to positive mental imagery. So if their goal is to hit a pitch low and away at the knees and they execute that in the game, lock that down, lock that in your mind. You want to replay that pitch over and over and over again. If maybe it's in practice and you're actually feeling and seeing yourself execute your goal, trapping those images and trapping that film footage in your own mind, I feel like is hugely important, because the more we can kind of play out those visualizations, or the more we play those visualizations in our minds, rather, I feel like the more of a chance we're going to have to play out those visualizations in real life. So that's something I utilized tremendously in my life. I would fall asleep every single night. Literally from when I started pitching to when my career ended, I'm falling asleep thinking about painting sliders against lefties or change-ups fading away from righties while they're swinging over top of it. And just seeing him play out in real life is a cool thing. Obviously it's one thing just to visualize one good pitch and never practice it, but you want to continue practicing it so you know you can execute it. But the visualization aspect, I think, is very, very big. And again, it just kind of ties back into how our brain and our mind calibrate coordination for what we want to do. And if it's to throw pitches to certain locations, replaying that is going to help us process better. It's going to help us map the reason for tasking and moving better.
Yeah, I agree. It could be a tough thing for a kid to grasp, but if you can learn to kind of look at yourself, in the outer body, have an outer body experience, you can kind of learn that process. You can't really tell if a guy is visualizing and even if they're doing it right. So it's kind of tough to get into their mind, because you want to help them and you want to get them away from mechanics. So I don't know. It's just the interesting dynamic with the whole visualization stuff.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, I feel like it's definitely underrated. I mean, I think people think it's important, and it's kind of cool to see some of the stuff you see on social media nowadays. It's cool to see some of the VR stuff for hitters and things like that. It's the perception is everything because it helps us problem solve. So if we can replay those reps in our mind, it's going to help us solve the problems we have in real life. So the only issue is we're not physically moving. So, but visually seeing, that's why I think command is interesting in the fact that it's very task oriented, goal oriented. We can see if we're succeeding the task, and we can kind of see and watch ourselves go through our motions and either execute or not. And it's kind of cool to kind of always positively, mental imagery wise, replay those positive images so that we can kind of like build that confidence. So
Yeah, and you can actually get reps. I'm a big believer in throwing a lot, and I know you are too, but
right.
There are some programs out there that just says, you can't throw. So at least, you got to find a way to get your reps in, and you can do that with visualization.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not 100% the same, but it's still reps.
Right. Your body needs to be able to operate as much as you want. And again, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but that's why I threw so much. Like I was
right.
I completely went against culture when I was growing up. Culture, like, oh, you can't throw more than 100 pitches. You can't throw this. You got to make sure to take this many days off. I was like, you know what? I don't care about any of this. I'm going to go out and throw 300 pitches today. Now, I don't go on Twitter and tell people to go out and throw 300 pitches.
Right.
It's a little reckless. But at the same time, again, it just kind of speaks to my career. Like, I just did not care what the culture said I had to do. Like, if I wanted to go outside and throw 300 pitches to the opposite arm side corner, then that's what I did. And then I would wake up the next day and go do it again. And people would always be like, man, you have really good command. Or like, how do you execute so well? Like, I threw thousands of pitches. And again, although I want to tell everyone to do that, you can't.
Right.
It's a little bit reckless. But again, I think that the trick with that, when I do mention that, is I did not do it at 100% effort. I did it at levels that I could repeat and just be comfortable and visually see me execute my goal. And that was just part of how I lived and how I wanted to be. So again, a little bit biased there, and a little bit of a tangent. Sorry.
Right. Let's talk mindset. There's obviously, you have to get to a point where you are trusting your stuff and have confidence in your stuff. And a lot of times, whenever we are not executing our pitches, it's because in our mind, we are not trusting or we don't have confidence in that pitch. So can you talk a little bit about the mindset part?
Yeah. I mean, some people, it's funny because you'll turn on a major league game and like, man, what makes you so confident? Like, I throw 100 miles an hour. Like, of course you're going to feel confident to throw 100 miles an hour, but the 40, 100 mile an hour pitchers in the minor leagues don't feel confident. They're not confident because they're not executing their pitches the way that they want to. So, or they are confident and then just not succeeding the way that they want to. So there's a little delusion there sometimes. But confidence in your pitches comes down to in my opinion, again, based on everything that I talk about, is your ability to execute pitches. So like when a guy gets in the box, I'm very confident that I'm going to get ahead in the count, and I'm confident I'm going to get ahead in the count because of how I design my practice and how I train so much. So, confidence is built around. I have to take it back to the design of practice, like understanding and knowing your ability to execute pitches. And if you did everything in your preparation to do that, then there's going to be some confidence there in order to, and that are going to reflect that training and reflect how you prepared. As far as like stuff goes and like what you have, I mean, yeah, like I said, you're going to have what you have in that day. You're going to have what you have in that present moment. And if you have really filthy stuff, that's great. That's awesome that you have filthy stuff. You have it in that present moment. But if you can't utilize any of it, why are we pitching? Why are we playing a team sport? Why are you out there? And again, it's just for some, it's just a road of insanity. They'll just keep going out, but keep trying to make their stuff better and nastier. And it's just like it's either they're ignorant or they just continue to be told what they need to have, and they don't understand it needs to be applied. And so yeah, I would say confidence for me came down to execution and knowing that when a batter stepped in the box, I had a plan how to get them out, and it was to move the ball around and change speeds and embarrass them. And I was, although I didn't throw 90 miles an hour consistently, I was able to embarrass hitters and strategizing, and it's fun to do.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about the pregame routine in terms of working on command? What the pregame routine?
Sure. So I mean, aside from stretching and getting yourself ready, you mean like physically ready?
Yeah.
So for me, when I was coaching the guys in the Division I staff, I left some freedom there with how they got themselves prepared. I mean, we did have some discussions as a staff, how they went through their bullpens leading up like pregame, but because a lot of it was just there was just so much disparity, or just so much separation or difference in why and when they were throwing pitches. Like there was no pattern to what they were trying to do. They were just literally catchers setting up down the middle, and they're just throwing pitches. They're just throwing pitches, switching pitches, throwing pitches. Like there's no intentional. There's no ability to establish. And I did a video a while back talking about establishment and holding yourself accountable. So, I kind of nudged them in the direction of, hey, listen, like we should be trying to establish our fastball first. We're going to be using this mostly in the game. It's going to be a pitch. It's going to be a pitch or pitch type that we locate the most or need to use the most. So, why don't we try to like establish what we're trying to do more? So maybe if you want to start your pen, like maybe you are working the middle first. Maybe you are working the opposite arm side first, which was something I did because I always felt like I wanted to get to my furthest reaching release point, which was opposite arm side or glove side rather. Establish areas of the zone. Like pay attention to what you're doing. Did you succeed? Don't just mindlessly go through your warm up to get loose. Like work on something. Like the same way when you're playing catch, hit the glove. Like don't just throw. Like pay attention. So, it wasn't like an exact way. A lot of the pitchers wanted to know an exact way. So I gave them an exact way, and the exact way was exactly how I did it. And that's because that's what they wanted. They wanted to know how I did it. And the other ones, I just they might have did it in more of a general sense, but at least they had a better understanding of establishing stuff. So that's kind of what we would focus on. And they would just work through their pitches that way and pitch by pitch, and then they might pattern them at the end. But it was much less convoluted in their than what they were previously doing, where it was just like no rhyme or reason, just throwing different pitches, didn't care where it went, things like that. So.
Right. So whenever you were at that college and you were a college coach, even with the guys that you work with now, part of that command is being able to throw the ball where you want based on what the hitter's giving you. So the whole reading the hitter part. Can you talk a little bit about that process? Because a lot of guys, I don't think enough young pitchers watch for cues that the hitters are giving them and building a game plan off of it. So can you talk a little bit about a simple process that you use? There are things to pay attention to get guys out.
Yeah, again, I think, this is a tough question because none of that matters if you can't execute pitches. So, like, if a guy can't execute where the pitch is going, it doesn't really matter if he's late or early. If he's late on an outside fastball, like if he's late on an outside fastball and the guy doesn't have the ability to execute an inside fastball, does it really matter that we should be trying to throw inside if he can't get it in there anyway? He's just going to throw it down the middle, So yeah, those are things that are important. Those are things that I would bring to the attention of the staff. Like, listen, if you're able to execute pitches better, this opens up a very wide variety of ways to strategize against hitters. AKA like looking at their scouting reports. What are some of their weaknesses? For me, I was somebody who had a good level of command. I was very confident in my ability to execute, and I was very confident in what I did. I always felt like they needed a scouting report on me. Like it wasn't like I was always adjusting to them, but in the moment, like in the moment of that bats, that is in more. I would say that's a very advanced type of understanding, and that's where I feel like why pitching coaches, I had a blog all about saying pitch calling is stupid. It's only stupid if pitchers can't execute. Then the mental energy of the pitching coach is just being wasted. Now, pitching coaches, I think, understand, what's going on when guys are late, when guys are early, when they're on their front foot, if they have a long swing, if they have a short swing, where they excel. Like, we're going to have a better understanding of how to execute against a hitter. And we want to teach that to the pitcher. But no matter how much a pitcher understands all of that information, if they don't possess a skill that allows them to execute the pitches the way they need to be, we're just wasting energy. Which is why I always go back to location. Like you want to have a somewhat of a decent rate of command or locating pitches so that we can strategize in that sense. So it's a good question, but it's a little bit more advanced, I'd say. Once you have that level of skill, like once you feel like you've reached that level of skill where you can execute really well, then we can start utilizing other things like scouting reports or guys that are earlier, guys that are later, paying attention to all this other stuff.
Yeah, those are great points, man. So let me ask you this. So when you got a guy that comes to you and he pitched on Saturday, and he comes in and you ask him, "Hey man, how'd it go?" And he said, "Well, fastball went well, the changeup was okay, but the curveball horrible." What's that conversation like? Does this mean that you go in there and work on throwing a bunch of curveballs, or what's your talk about why a pitch might not work one day?
It could be for a variety of reasons. It could be game flow. Like maybe you started using your changeup early, or you threw a couple early in the game and they hung and you got away from it. Like there's so many dynamics at play in the course of a baseball game that could redirect your thought process. It doesn't mean, again, if that pitcher has a filthy curveball, it's not the fact that he doesn't already possess the ability to throw a really quality pitch. Obviously, it wasn't working that day. I can speak to that because I've had days where my certain pitches just aren't working the way that you want.
Yeah.
And again, there's variables in play that could be affecting that. It could be people crowding it could be anything like people crowding the plate, there being a hole in the mound, to it being a little bit rainy, a little bit slick out there. There's lots of different things that can affect what happens. It could be cold and maybe you just don't have as good of a grip on it, So
yeah.
No, I wouldn't say, "Oh my gosh, your curveball wasn't as good, but we have to go practice it right away." Like, no, you already throw a really good curveball. The goal is to create that adaptability, and that's where a lot of my research has kind of been heading lately, like with how I'm doing nonlinear constraint learning, like understanding the adaptability and the dexterity to perform under any type of environment, and chaos. If it is a cold day, if there is a hole, if it is rainy, if the batters are crowded the plate, so that we can adapt to it. And again, I practiced insane amounts of practice throughout my life to have that level of execution. And sometimes those environments just get the best of you, and it's something that you just go back and think about. And you're like, man, how do I overcome that?
Yeah.
And how do I problem solve? And so I don't think there's any direct answer. I don't want to say I don't know, but I don't think there's any one direct answer where you're like, "Oh my gosh, we have to do this." And unfortunately, right. I feel like a lot of coaches do that. They don't take into account a lot of the other logical factors that could come into play.
Right, and that's why I asked, because there's going to be some coaches listening to this, or maybe not. I don't know who's listening, but they're going to be seeing this. They're going to see, hey, your curveball wasn't working, and so they're going to go and throw 400 curveballs, thinking that was the issue.
Right.
There's a lot of things involved in being able to execute a pitch, and you just didn't have it one day, and that's going to happen. And there's going to be days where you just don't have it, and it's going to be okay.
Right. I think this is a really cool direction we're kind of going, because in some ways, when I think about a lot of my command, like when I think about my process, and at least some of the ways I worked on with the guys, you are in more of a controlled environment, and most of the way, even if you have like the best constraints and the best practice design, you're still in somewhat of a controlled setting. And like I said, compared to like maybe like the mound or the weather or the cold or the batters, So in some ways, I look back at it as like the game was going to be my next problem solving for me to become have more dexterity. So like if that day was cold and things weren't quite working right, then I would work against it and try to overcome it. And it's like the game became my way to evolve, or my way to become better at that. So if it happened again, I knew how to adapt to that environment, And
right.
It's kind of interesting when you think about it like that, but you look at it sometimes, and that's why there's so many different stats on pitchers or just players in general. Like, how does he play under the lights? How does he play during the day? How does he play in the hot? How does he play in the cold?
Yeah.
There's so many things. How does he play at home? How does he play away?
Right.
All of these things are taken into account. And it's cool. It's a way for us to realize, wow, I struggle with this. How can I overcome this? And being aware of it. Most people aren't aware of it, but being aware of the problem and trying to solve it in the moment of the game. It's tricky, but at the same time, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So Dustin, man, to kind of wrap this up, if I'm a young coach and I'm listening to this show and I'm listening to you talk, and maybe I'm tipping too far to the velocity side and I'm getting frustrated because some of my guys are not being able to command, what's your advice? You got the book out, which I highly recommend, www.lokatenation.com. That's locate with a K. So check that out. But what's your advice for these young coaches?
I think the biggest problem the coaches, any coach at any level, no matter how much they love command, and no matter how much they love my message, or how much they love, or not just my message, how much there's many people out there with this message, and there's many people out there that have had careers in the game at lower speeds or even higher speeds, and they're able to do what we're talking about today. I think the biggest problem they're going to face isn't the fact that maybe they feel like they are more velocity focused, or maybe they feel like their kids are struggling. It's going to be a constant competition because of the way the game is shaped today. And it's unfortunate to say, but it's going to constantly be it's going to have to be a countercultural thought or a countercultural idea in the mind of the individual. Man. That they're like, this is more important to me. I want to be a really good pitcher in the game. I want to make sure I'm really balancing my efforts. No matter how much a coach says something to an individual, the Major League Baseball, the culture of the game is going to say, if you want to play at the highest level, you got to throw 107. And that's going to always be in the back of people's minds. So no matter how much they feel like they're working on command, if they're not putting forth their most amount of effort, as we discussed before, if they're not putting forth their best effort, as in their best effort to throw hard or use max effort for force, they're going to have a really tough time getting better command. So coaches, I feel for you. I've been there. I've talked to these guys, and sometimes it's like you're just staring into a blank wall because they understand what they understand what they want to do and they understand what they need to do to make it to the highest level, but they aren't able to comprehend what needs to be done to produce skill, to produce that level of skill that we're looking for, that level of execution. And it's very tough. It's something I don't think can be underestimated. And that's where and this is one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing. When I coached at the Mount, it was those guys that had some talent. They had some really good professional qualities with their pitches and their motions, and we just couldn't put it together because they were always trying to throw harder. And they just fizzled, they just fizzled. They couldn't put up the numbers. They couldn't. They just fizzled. It was unfortunate to see, and I just hate to see that happen to guys that really have potential to maybe move on in their career. Maybe it is only indie ball. Maybe they do maybe they do sign as a free agent. I just want guys to want to be successful in the game and not just try to always appease that 100-mile-an-hour mark. And there's no reason why you can't get there with command. Why not? But just maybe reevaluate this thing. So coaches, I feel for you. It's just going to take a lot of conversation. That's it. You just kind of keep working and talking guys through it, helping them make decisions about how they're training.
Awesome. Well, listen, Dustin, this has been a great conversation. Thanks for coming on.
Geoff, thanks for having me on. Look forward to doing it again sometime, my man. Awesome stuff.
I'm Geoff Rottmayer. Thank you for listening to our conversation on the Baseball Awakening podcast. Stay tuned for a recap show tomorrow.